Hi guys, Mrs. Vance again. This is your Unit 14 test review. So we're just going to go over a few of the basics about the test. Any details you need to go back and look at the notes or the activities that we've done throughout the unit. So what's on the test? We have 40 multiple choice questions as usual. Slightly more than half of these are on ecology, about 22 I think were on ecology, and about 18 or so on plants, so a little bit less than half on plants. The topics in plants were that are covered on the test are plant structure and transport, reproduction, and plant responses. On ecology, then we've got food chains and webs, ecological relationships, populations and communities, succession, energy flow, nutrient cycles, population growth. There are 3 bonus questions. They're short answer. They will require a little bit of calculation. There's a calculator enabled on the test, so you can just, it's really simple. You won't have any trouble with it. Think population density. All right, so let's talk about some of the details. So plant structure, remember, there are 4 main kinds of plant tissues. Dermal tissue, which covers and protects, kind of like your skin does. Vascular tissue, which transports water and sugars. Water is transported in the xylem, and sugars are transported in the phloem. So you can remember phloem food. That kind of helps you remember which one's which. The ground tissue is for storage and photosynthesis and support. Most of the tissues of the plant, most of the tissues that are not dermal or vascular are going to be ground tissue. And then there are special tissues called meristem tissues, meristematic tissues. These are for growth. This is where mitosis happens, mostly at the tips of stems and roots. The nodes can be stimulated to develop. There's kind of dormant meristematic tissue there. And then, of course, plants that get bigger in diameter also have some layers of meristematic tissue in the underneath the dermal tissue, but that's not something that we talked about in this class, and you're not responsible for that. Water transport, of course, is powered by transpiration. Remember, that's evaporation from the leaves, and that comes out through the guard cells. Guard cells are through the stomata. Guard cells change shape to open and close the stomata, and that allows for the gas exchange, the carbon dioxide, water vapor, and oxygen that are transported into and out of the cells by diffusion. Plant reproduction. Flowers are the reproductive organs of angiosperms. Those are the flowering plants. And the main parts are the carpel or pistil, which is the female part of the flower, and that's composed of the stigma, style, and ovary. The ovary contains the ovules, which will develop into the seeds, of course. The stamen is the male part of the flower, and this is composed of an anther, which produces pollen, and the filament, which holds up the anther. And remember that the whole purpose of fruits is for seed dispersal. The definition of a fruit is a ripened ovary containing seeds. Remember that fruits don't necessarily look like fruits. Sometimes they're very odd looking, but they're programmed or designed for seed dispersal, either by being eaten or blown in the wind or something transported by water, something like that. Plant responses. Plants respond to various kinds of stimuli. Of course, hormones, like we learned about in animals, regulate growth and reproduction. You don't have to know a whole lot of details about the different hormones. Auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins, and ethylene. Most of them are involved with growth, stem elongation, something like that. Ethylene is involved with fruit ripening, but I don't think any of those things is necessarily on the test. It's just understanding that hormones do stimulate growth in different areas in response to those hormones. Tropisms are the growth responses causing plants to grow either toward or away from some kind of stimulus. Phototropism, of course, is the growth toward light. Gravitropism is growth toward gravity or away from gravity. The roots grow toward gravity. That's a positive gravitropism, and stems grow away from gravity. That's negative gravitropism. And then the third one we talked about was thigmotropism, which is a response to touch that involves wrapping of tendrils around poles or stems or something like that to kind of hold up the stem. There are other kinds of thigmotropism as well, but that's the main kind that we talked about. In terms of ecology, so first thing we talked about in ecology was populations. Remember, the population is a group of individuals occupying the same area, individuals of the same species that interact with each other. Population density is the number of individuals per unit area or volume. So how would you calculate that? The number of individuals divided by the unit area or volume, whichever one you're talking about. Dispersion, of course, is how the population is spread out. So the dispersion patterns we talked about were clumped, where you have just clumps of groups of the population. Uniform, which is evenly distributed, or random, that's just randomly distributed. Exponential growth is when you have population increase under ideal conditions. There's plenty of food, plenty of space, plenty of water, no limiting factors. Logistic growth is when the population growth slows down because of limiting factors. The limiting factors can be either biotic limiting factors or abiotic limiting factors. They have to do with whether it has to do with the amount of space, physical space, or whether there are predators or enemies, or too much population, those kinds of things. Not enough food, all of those things. Some are density dependent limiting factors. Some are density independent, things like storms and catastrophes. Carrying capacity is the maximum population size that a particular environment can sustain, and that means sustain not just for right now, but over the long term. And so whatever the limiting factors are, they cause the population to level off at a certain level, and that level that it levels off at is generally the carrying capacity. A community is all the populations of organisms of different species that live close enough together for potential interaction. They may or may not interact with each other, but they live close enough together in order to interact. Sometimes species are competing for the same resources, and so we talked about several different kinds of competition. Mutualism is when both species benefit from the relationship. They help each other. Commensalism is when one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor helped, and we talked about several examples of this. Parasitism, you've got a parasite that benefits, but the host is harmed. And predation, of course, a predator kills and eats the prey, so that's definitely has a relationship similar to parasitism, other than it's a larger organism rather than something internal. Trophic levels. Remember the trophic levels, that's the feeding relationships. The trophic levels are the producers, which are autotrophs, the primary consumers, which are herbivores, things that eat the autotrophs, secondary consumers eat the herbivores, and tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers. Remember also that most animals don't eat only one thing. Most of the time they can eat a variety of things, and so they may be feeding at different trophic levels at different times. The food chains is the sequence of food it transfer up the trophic levels. That includes nutrients, that includes energy as well. A food web is a network of interconnecting food chains, again, because most animals don't eat just one thing. They can eat several different things at different trophic levels. Energy flow, remember that about 10% of the energy available at one trophic level is passed on to the next higher trophic level. It's not a hard and fast number, it's an estimate or an average, and it averages around 10%, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. You don't have to know a whole lot of details about that, and you do not have to calculate it. Biogeochemical cycles we talked about. We talked about the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, and also phosphorus and water. Okay, I didn't put anything about phosphorus and water on here. Phosphorus because I know there's not any questions about it, and water because I know you know the water cycle backwards, forwards, and upside down because you've studied it pretty much every year since you were in first or second grade. So the carbon or carbon-oxygen cycle depends on photosynthesis and respiration. Remember that it involves the atmosphere and organisms of both the producers and the autotrophs and heterotrophs, as well as decay is involved in that. The nitrogen cycle, nitrogen of course is necessary for proteins and nucleic acids, and it cycles through the atmosphere and using nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil and plants that can pick up the nitrogen containing compounds that are produced by the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Otherwise, that's pretty much what you need to know about biogeochemical cycles. Again, there may be a question about the water cycle. I don't remember, but you know the water cycle very well. You know the processes involved in the water cycle, and that should not be a problem. Biodiversity. So remember, that's the variety of all the life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem, depending on what you're talking about. We talked about trophic cascades. Remember, that's an ecological event that is triggered by either the addition or removal of a keystone species and the changes and how the ecosystem changes as a result of that. Keystone species are species that a species that has a greater influence on the ecosystem than either its abundance or its biomass would suggest. Oftentimes this is an apex predator, but sometimes it's a producer or something else in the trophic system. It just depends on that particular ecosystem. Of course, loss of biodiversity is a bad thing. That includes habitat loss, invasive species, over-harvesting of crops and resources, pollution, climate change, human activities. All of those things contribute to the loss of biodiversity, which is damaging to the world as a whole. Again, if you have any specific concerns about some of these specific things, I would go back and look at your notes again. You can watch the notes videos again if you need to. There's I believe there's a Quizlet or quizzes in the test review folder, and this video will be in there as well. So you can always look at that, review your vocabulary, make sure you know what's what, like you usually have done. Should not be a problem. Another note, we will be having a benchmark test on Monday. That's April the 26th. It will be available in Schoology, and you can take it there. We'll analyze the results and we'll get back to you. We'll spend the next couple of weeks working on reviewing for the biology end of course exam, the STAR test, which is on Thursday, May the 6th. And I don't have any concerns about you doing well on that. The biology end of course exam is generally not that hard. We don't have very many students ever not pass that test, and certainly not any pre-AP biology students. So it should not be a problem. We have some review materials set up for you, and we'll have a schedule of review to go over and give you a chance to focus on or practice on the things that you need the most help with as a result of looking at the benchmark test that we'll take on Monday. And that's all. Study for your test and do well. So long.